Good morning, and thank you for joining us for this morning's Mobile Master Chat. My name is Abby Rojas, and I am the Associate Director of Alumni Relations at the UWM Alumni Association and the Office of Advancement. Today, our Master Chat is once again mobile because our exceptional guest speaker is joining us from Massachusetts. Dr. Romkaew Broehm is a two-time graduate of UW-Milwaukee and an economics expert with over 25 years of experience in the electric utility industry. She has assisted in utilities and government agencies and testified before regulators in the areas of market competition and oversight, impacts of regulatory policy on wholesale power markets, and electricity market design. She has also authored books and articles and spoken throughout the US and Asia on the Western power crisis, market power, market manipulation, and future trends in the electricity utility industry. Today, Dr. Broehm is joined by Professor John Haywood, Distinguished Professor of Economics here at UWM. They will have a moderated conversation about the evolution of the power markets to achieve net zero emissions. There will be time at the end of the presentation or at the end of the conversation for questions, so feel free to add those in the chat. At this time, I will turn it over to Dr. Broehm and Professor Haywood.
Abby, thank you very much. And thank you, as Abby says, for everyone who's joining us today at this Master Chat. I'm John Haywood, as Abby said, and I'm a longtime professor here at UWM in the economics department. And our guest, Romkaew Broehm, an expert in the electric power industry, was once upon a time a student of mine. Dr. Broehm has held a variety of positions studying and writing, contributing to this industry over several decades, and is now the principal of her own very successful consulting firm in the Boston area. Dr. Broehm, thank you for being with us to share your knowledge and perspective.
Thank you, Professor Haywood, and it's an honor for me to actually be here and speak to everyone.
Well, you're very kind. I should say I've known Romkaew for a long time. She graduated from UWM in the 1990s with her PhD in economics, and it's always wonderful to welcome someone back home again. What an interesting time to be in the thick of the electricity industry. What was once based on a rather boring rate utility regulated model is now much more disaggregated and much more deregulated. This change may have brought benefits that we'll certainly learn about, but it's also had some pitfalls, rolling blackouts in California and Nevada, the near failure of the Texas grid. So, just to name a few. So this change in the industry has been happening as political will and perhaps economic necessity has pushed us toward cleaner energy, less coal, less fossil fuel in general, more renewables and alternative energy. The goal of many, surely not all, is an electrical generating industry with net zero emissions. What does that mean? Will it happen? If so, how? I'm sure hearing from Romkaew on these issues will prove illuminating. Romkaew, perhaps you can start by briefly telling us how you got involved in this industry after leaving UWM all those years ago.
I think this has to do with my first job. I got to work at a consulting firm in Madison, Christensen Associates, and they do a lot of work in utilities, particularly in electric industry. So my first project I remember that I got assigned to work on is on rate design. And it was just really perked my interest because you never thought that what you learn in theory, microeconomics, get really applied to figure out, how to maximize welfare to set rates. So that's really triggered my interest. And then after that, I get a chance to move on to work with my old firm, the Broehm Group in Massachusetts. And I've been there and start working on the regulation side of the industry. Have seen a lot of market evolved over time across the country, particularly in California and other part of the country as well. So so that's making things very exciting for me, particularly right now, as you mentioned, John, that the industry itself, it's at the point in time that have a lot of challenges and opportunities happening in the space. And there are a lot more to talk about it as we're trying to move the economy going down toward clean energy economy.
I'll look forward to learning more today, but I'm delighted to hear you tell me that the things you learned in the classroom all those years ago actually paid off and had some practical use. Wonderful. Some people think economics is a dismal science, but we tend to think of it as one of the more useful sciences.
Yeah, that's definitely.
Perhaps you could tell us briefly how this old model of the industry worked and how it's changed over the years.
Definitely. But let me share some slide because I think it will be easier for the listener to actually understand what we are talking about.
Excellent.
Just give me a moment. I think. Hang on a second. Slideshow. Okay. I hope you all can see the slide that I'm sharing right now. Let me start by remind everyone that with this industry, it started out as a franchise industry. Why is that? Because even today, we always count on electricity and our utility or electricity provider. Every time you turn on the switch, you want to make sure that the light is going on. But in the old day, this ownership structure is different than what we're seeing today. Partly it's because we rely on the economy of scale. We learned from the economic textbook that, you know, the utility industry is similar to what we call a natural monopoly. So the more you produce, the saving that you actually receive, because the average cost is actually getting lower, and it's much lower in this case, making the marginal cost is even lower as well, as shown in from one of the textbooks picture. What it means then is that a utility that receive a franchise will actually own generators. It could be a lot of generators, as long as these generations or the capacity that they build can meet the peak load of their customers. And then they have to make sure that they have a high voltage transmission line that can deliver those power to your household. In order to deliver this power, you also need the distribution system, which is basically making the high voltage power line become lower. So in this case, you will see that the structure of the industry usually breaking it down into generation, transmission, and distribution. So we have across the US, we have over hundreds of utilities of franchise. Both are investor-owned utilities, meaning privately owned, or it could be municipalities, public powers, it depending upon various area that is happening. Each bubble that I'm showing here on this US and Canada map refers to the control area. And the line that link together, it actually refers to the transmission line that usually connect one system of one utility to another utility. And if you think of at UWM as an example, Wisconsin Electric Power is having a franchise within the Milwaukee area, and it's will be responsible for generating electricity or buying electricity and deliver it into your house and making sure that you have your lights on. To balancing whether the light will go on or not going on, each utility must make sure that they maintain reliability to the system, because demand and supply of electricity must be balanced at all times. The frequencies that they emit the electron into the grid and where we actually take out, again, have to balance. It can be deviate, but it can only be deviate within seconds. And then they have to bring them back as quick as possible. So these frequency response and reliability issue, we won't often, as consumer, really pay much attention to it, as long as, like I said, if you turn the switch on, the lights show on, doesn't flick, we are happy, right? That's basically the old ways that we're doing it. But as the utilities operate their system under the regulations, we have to realize that we also want our utilities to operate under least cost, because even though they are a national monopoly and have this franchise, we don't want them to spend money and then go and build power plants that we don't really need, or sometimes only need for 1 hour, because the power plants that they build are very, very expensive. So it means then that in order to do that, a lot of utilities will decide maybe the day before that they have to serve load, that they could go and trade with other utilities as well. And that's why all these transmission line that connecting to different utilities are very, very helpful in that sense. But what the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is afraid is that if some utilities decide to maintain their control of their system without trading with anyone, or even let anybody else using their line, that could become an issue. So a lot of time, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission have issues, rules, and regulations to make sure there is a fair access into their transmission system. So in this case, it's very successful back then in the 1990s. If you recall, in the 1990s, we have a lot of telephone, a lot of airlines deregulated. Electric industry is also the same way. Because they start seeing benefit of trading, and they want to actually expand that more than just a bilateral trade that is going on. But one thing to note is that in the old days, all the rates are pretty much regulated at cost-based rate. But once we decided we want to making the market become, we want to actually use market more, that means that we're going to have to release some of these cost-based rate regulations.
And that led to more of a regional market.
That's correct. And the basic thing that is happening then is that in this graph that I'm showing you is various area with different colors that have developed and evolved into a wholesale electricity market. And these are actually an organized market where there is an independent system operator that control the bidding process, meaning to clear the market, as well as the transmission to deliver power from the winning bids or the winning offers to go to the buyers. So the market involved in this case, allowing the benefits in terms of getting power to go and be able to trade across the country in some sense. Let me pause that and see whether you have other questions that you want to follow up with that.
Well, I think it's important just to emphasize that what you're describing is that instead of individual utilities making their own decisions, there's now a market that happens where buyers and sellers of electricity get together, and there's actually almost, if you will, a auctioneer who is setting prices in these different regional markets, and that's very, very different than what happened 20 years ago.
Actually, but remember that the Western power crisis happened in 2000, and that's almost 20 years ago.
Okay. So I'm old. I meant 30 years ago.
Yes. And one of the things that actually, if I go back to this graph real quick to just emphasize, is that remember that we have in order to deliver power to each household and consumer, we have to have generation, transmission, and the distribution system. The generation part of here is actually, we found that as the market develops, or actually as the times go by, technologies have been advanced and develops in this area. And therefore, you see smaller generators coming up, and power marketers or independent power producers can actually generate their own electricity and willing to actually sell. So in order to develop all those organized market, one of the key that is happening in each of these markets is that these generators need to actually be unbundled from their transmission ownership. And when I say unbundle, it doesn't mean it has to be legally unbundling. It can be functionally unbundling, as long as they have a separate rules and conduct to allow the generators, operators, and the marketers not involved in terms of scheduling the transmission for other third parties, because we want to make sure that there is a fair competition in the wholesale market.
Yes.
So that's why I mentioned that in all these markets, you will see there is an independent system operator that.
Got it. Why don't you tell us a little about the two-way markets that are also important in the current environment?
Sure. Yes, actually, this slide captures what is going on today. As you know, that the technologies not only in terms of making, we have more renewables into the market at the generation level here, but we also have software, Wi-Fi, Internet of Things that allow more communications that is going on. And consumers itself then have more choices to decide whether they actually can install their own resources by their house, by their site. And that's what is going on, is the grid now is moving into at the edge by the customers, allowing the customer to be able to produce their own generation. And if they have access, they actually can sell it back to the utility, to the distribution system, or to other neighbors. And then in this case, they will have either another supplier to help them do that, or the the utility distribution company that can actually be a middleman that can actually do that.
Got it. So we have both sophisticated, deregulated regional markets, and we also have many individuals participating as both consumers and producers, what you call prosumers, which is cute. So can you contrast what you see as the advantages and disadvantages of the current, more deregulated industry?
Yes, let me say about the advantage first. You have more choices, and we all know that competition allow us to be able to choose the product that is right fit for us, right? So you have, in terms of efficiencies, in terms of consumption and investment, that's allowing the economy to make the right allocation of resources. However, as the market develop here, there are a lot of market design to making sure that the market sends the right price signal, because it's all about pricing, that allowing consumers and investors and generators to make a decision on what to produce, what to buy, and how much, right? So in this case, one disadvantage that happened, and it's actually happened, and we have seen, is that there is a volatility in the prices, and sometimes the price can go up very, very high. You have seen in the 2021, when there is a cold snap in ERCOT, the price could go up to, in some intervals of the market, the price can go up to $9,000 per megawatt hour.
What is ERCOT, Romkaew? What is ERCOT?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's electric reliability of Texas. So in this case, it's pretty much the state of Texas market. And that's not the only example. You can recall the Western power crisis in California. That has very, very severe experience that almost stopped deregulations in many parts of the countries. California, yeah.
Is it fair to say that because of the drive for efficiency, that we're kind of closer to the edge in some sense of running out of electricity in certain places at certain times? Or at least at the prices we can observe?
I mean, that's correct, because what happened is the market allow you to bid in what are you willing to buy and what are you willing to sell. So if they're not a mismatch, there is a mismatch in terms of the willingness to buy and willing to sell, you wouldn't have any energy to actually take out of the market, correct? But the role of the independent system operator is to make sure the light is always on because of the reliability. If you allow the market to unclear, meaning not be able to clear, the grid can collapse. And if the grid collapse, even by 1 minute or in seconds, you might not be able to bring them back. And you see that from the experience in ERCOT, it takes weeks before a lot of people will have their electricity back. So in this case, you're right in terms of every time we see high prices, the market trying to tell you that there is a scarcity in the market. The ERCOT is an unusual situation, right? Because 30,000 megawatt of thermal plants wouldn't be able to come online due to the cold snap, and natural gas pipeline have to be shut down, cannot be operated. And I think that's the main reason of the scarcity into the market. And the market design has pretty much trying to signal that. They put expert in this area have put a lot of thought and debate in terms of what kind of market design that they need in order to send this price signal. In
Okay,
ERCOT,
Romkaew, I think it's very interesting, this sort of to contrast the old and the new. I know our listeners are interested in net zero emissions, and the administration and Congress recently passed what many are calling the first climate bill under the name of the Inflation Reduction Act. And while the bill consists of many provisions, the press is focused on the incentives to move toward cleaner and greener energy and the goal of net zero emissions. What exactly does that mean?
the net zero emission, basically, we have to have a baseline, and the scientists used the 2005 as a baseline. In this case, what we're saying is we want to see these greenhouse gas emissions to reduce by 50% when compared to the 2005 level. The 2005 level greenhouse gas emissions is about 6.6 billion metric tons that we emitted. Currently, right now, we actually, I think 2021, the number might have come down to 5.5, and that's still only less than 20%, right? The goal for Inflation Reduction Act toward net zero emission is we want to reduce this emission by 50% by 2030, and another 50%, meaning to come down to net zero by 2050. The first part is probably not that difficult. I mean, I shouldn't say not that difficult, but it's relatively going to be more difficult in the second half when we have to really go toward net zero, 50, the last 50%.
That makes sense. So I know that you've given some thought to what this move toward net zero emissions means, and you've come up with what you call the top 10 trends in clean energy. And tell us what you mean by these top 10 points, and then I'm anxious to start hearing about them. But give us a flavor about what you're describing.
Okay. Let me show you real quick on this pie chart to understand first. First of all, this electric power industry has been thinking about this issue of greenhouse gas emission and how to actually have a better, cleaner energy, not in the past year, but they have been thinking about it in the past, I would say 10 to 20 years, and maybe start thinking seriously in the past 10 years. So if you're looking at the left-hand side of this pie chart, you will see that the electric power industry contribute about 31% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So they're taking this issue very seriously. And this is the second compared to the transportation sector, which is 33%. Okay, and majority of the greenhouse gas emissions that coming out is the carbon dioxide, CO2. Okay, so the first thing that means that they want to actually try to decarbonize the electric production. That's what we actually try to do and have been doing. And the way each states have done so far is the policy in terms of renewable portfolio standard, setting the goal that all the load serving entities and utilities should serve their load with renewables at some percentage. For example, Wisconsin may set it at 10% by, let's say, 2015. And they have been setting this goal for quite some times now. And in California, as an example, they're setting the goal of RPS to be 60% by 2030. So if you're looking at this graph that I pulled it from the EIA, you will see that the proportion of electric generation that coming from various fuels as we standing today is starting to have more solar and wind into our mix compared to 2010, which hardly see any of the solar at all. Maybe we'll see some of the wind. But now, as we see here, we have maybe about 4% solar, 9% wind. And what we also see the trend is these next 20 years or 30 years, all these renewables are going to be rising, and it's going to have playing an important role in terms of generation of the electricity.
Good. So the first trend is we're going to see continued growth of wind and solar alternative energy.
Yes, for decarbonizing the electric production.
Understood.
But one problem that I want to point out is that as the level of renewables increase into the system, remember that I mentioned the issue of reliability, and we have to make sure that demand and supply always balance at all the time. But because wind and solar depend on nature, when the wind stops blowing or the sun stops shining, we need to make sure that there are some other resources that can actually help supporting the system as well. The left-hand side graph that I'm showing here is actually showing that as the morning come in, when the sun starts to shine, you will actually see that the net demand, which is this dark blue line here, is actually decreased because of we be able to use more of these resources coming on. But as the times go by and the sun start to stop shining in the evening, we basically have to make sure that there are resources that is coming on. And if you're looking at the second graph, some of these resources that need to be able to be available to the system could be very, very large, very significant. The left-hand side graph is 8,000 megawatt within 3 hours, or 18,000 megawatt within 3 hours in March.
It sounds like we need batteries.
Exactly. And that's what happening right now is, what kind of resources that we need in order to provide this flexibility. But battery is not the only thing that can actually doing it. Some fast natural gas can also do that as well. But let me move on. Hydro, that is another thing. The right-hand side graph is interesting, partly is because as you see the green, which is renewable, increase, all the gas and hydro, large hydro is actually dropped. And this thing is picking up as all the renewables coming down. So pause your thought in terms of batteries. We'll come back and talk about the batteries. But most of the renewables that we have seen, especially large scale, they're not really site close to load. That means that we also need to make sure we have an infrastructure in terms of transmission grid to be able to bring those renewables come closer to the load. And the transmission grids also need to be stronger. The bipartisan infrastructure bill that passed last year also helping support in terms of expanding some of these incentive of transmission projects. So that's also something that is also important. Our grid is pretty old, have been built for many years, and there are some other technologies that we need to support in terms of communication to be able to communicate with, when renewables come online and how should the transmission being dispatched dynamically. Now, because the regulators recognize the integration of these renewables coming into the system, so they want to make sure that we have a fair trading platform in the wholesale market to be able to allowing renewables to be able to sell into the market and as well as batteries. Rules that was written 20 years ago when the market started may not be applicable to batteries or may not be applicable to water heaters that can also act as a battery storage some sense. So they have to change a lot of market rules in order to allowing all these clean energy resources to be available into the market. And I would say that the market have been so far in the process of implementing a lot of those rules vigorously. Number 7 that I see is that as I showed you earlier about prosumer, we have more and more of customers now starting to install solar rooftop. And it's also being because a lot of state regulators have given incentives through net metering process to allowing all these customers to be able to install rooftop solar and be able to sell their access. If some people might not be able to install their rooftop because they may be on the side where the sun doesn't shine, then there may be a community solar projects that they can join with their neighbors or communities to creating a purchase programs for green energy. The next one is one of the issue that we found as we develop toward clean energy industry is that a lot of people who can afford to buy the solar rooftop and install them could just leave the system. The issue is that when a utility plans for to serve their load, they have to plan for a year or more. And because the building of power plants, it takes at least 2 or 3 years to actually be able to build. That means that a lot of customers may be left and who could not afford to install the solar rooftop have to be living into the system and bearing a lot of these capital costs, while other well-to-do customers can install their rooftop. So that means that the regulators have to be able to align their rate and their cost on a fairly term, because you don't want the people who leave, get left into the system, bear all the capital cost that is happening. It's not, something that it's in terms of fair and equity that is going on. So there's a lot of rate design that we want to make sure that it's fair to the utilities, fair to all the customers equally. So you will see more and more of these going on as well, that the rate, instead of one flat rate, you see time varying rates. You also see
And-
the
and-
monthly exit fee.
And those time varying rates are not just for customers who take electricity, but also for prosumers that turn electricity back to the grid.
That's correct. That's
And
correct.
that's tricky to work out. I understand. Let's go ahead. Yes. Go.
Okay, that's now I don't think this enough yet, right? Because so far what I discussed most of the time it's on the supply side, the utility side. Now it's on the demand side. What could we do to help speed up in terms of this clean energy economy? There's a group of buyers. You might heard of it as RE100 or even outside the RE. RE is Renewable Energy 100. There is a requirements of all corporate buyers that want to fulfill their environmental, social, and corporate governance. And therefore they get together and they figure out, okay, what should we do? If each companies want to help, how could they actually do this? So they would be able to set their goals. They could procure all their energy from green energy. Might not necessarily to be 100% right away, but they could start out slowly, 5%, 10%, and etc. And
Sure.
that's what you will see that is going on right now. That is that a lot of companies start to buy more green energy, and
And it
want
doesn't,
to achieve.
it doesn't have to be just companies. I know a college or two that have done this as well.
Yes, I don't know whether you to Broehm have done it. I hope there might be some, but some might say, okay, what else could we do? And what they might say then is, let's looking at our supply chains. What our supply chain can actually help. So if they want to buy or come and sell products at our companies, you want to make sure that you are also meaning those suppliers can also try to be green as well.
Sure. Let's move on here.
Okay. And I think this is another one is electrifying the economy. We're talking so far about decarbonize the electric power industry, but I show you that the transportation is also the major contributor to the greenhouse gas. So in this case, if we be able to use more cleaner and reliable resources to fuel our fleet in terms of EV, I think that would also help speed up as well. Couple states now that saying that they no longer, but they have a policy to fade out the gasoline's car. You heard so much about California. I think then I believe couple weeks ago I heard about New York. They also set the goal that they don't want to have this gasoline by 2035, right? So the next one I would say is that we talk so much about prosumers because prosumer is so close to the distribution grid. The distribution grid also need to be smarter. We discuss about, the Internet of Things. We talk about the way how the sensory communications need to be improved into this space. Why are we doing that? Partly is because we want to make sure that sometimes when we use our electricity and we don't use them from our solar, if we can't store them in our grid or on our battery storage, and we sell them, the distribution may need them, and sometimes they may not need them. And if they might not need them, then they could just interrupt us, right? So one of the things that we want to make sure is that what could the suppliers at the distribution level can do to optimize the resources at this prosumer site. So you can treat yourself if you have solar rooftop as well as maybe batteries or even EV. Those combination could become your portfolio that turn into a virtual power plant that allowing some suppliers or utilities to dispatch all these things. There are companies that right now develop software as well as device that link and communicate to Alexa or some of those communications device to be able to dispatch your microwave or your refrigerator and just say, okay, let's just don't turn on, the microwave right now, or let's reduce the the air cooling system in the home right now if the price is so high. So they'll be able to communicate with the utility in terms of the pricing. And they have done that. And I think there are some of these that is already going on in California.
Interesting. So this is an opportunity for the Internet of Things to interact with the real-time pricing in these regional markets and cause both businesses and homes ultimately to optimize by saving resources, using energy when it's cheaper, and even taking many of those decisions out of the hands and doing it automatically, it sounds like.
That's correct. That's, and I think that is very, very helpful, right? Because it's they can communicate directly and do it automatically.
Got it. What is V2G?
V2G is the EV to grid, because the EV has batteries. So you'll be able to use those storage from the EV to dispatch to the grid when the grid needs it.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
and the last one,
and just a second, but before we go on, I'm very interested in the last one, but it seems to me that many of these fit together. I mean, you're probably only going to be able to have this Internet of Things talking to the utility companies and learning the prices when the distribution grid is also smarter.
That's correct. And I think all these, a lot of experts in the areas, they're trying to figure out ideas and ways to actually moving us toward cleaner energy industry. For the last one, I think this is very important. Like any other issues, it's always this last 10%, right? That is going to be harder to do. And I often emphasize early on that reliability is always critical within this industry. You always want to make sure the light is always on. But how could you move, all these economies in a deeper decarbonization energy if you don't have a larger scale generator with the low carbon fuel to balance the system.
So let me just try to understand, Romkaew. So we've said that things like solar and wind, these are fundamentally not reliable. They're important, but they're not reliable in the way you're using this word. And you're saying we need some other kind of large-scale generator to be able to achieve that reliability. Can you give us an example of what that might be?
Yeah, I mean, nuclear would be one, but the nuclear that they were talking about today is actually more of a new, more advanced, safer nuclear, smaller. There are different type of technologies. So there's a lot of these emerging smaller nuclear. They're not being built yet, but they being thinking about it, designing and in the process of research and development to do it. And I know that there are some groups in the industry that it's trying to push this forward and see that that could be one way to help us, be able to achieve the last part of our goal to get through the 100%. The next one is the hydrogen, because even though the hydrogen has been used in some application, but they're not widespread. And you probably know that there is different type of hydrogen, meaning the feedstock going into the hydrogen. And what we're talking about is how to making them to be greener hydrogen. The part of the Inflation Reduction Act also provide incentives to come up with the innovation of the emerging clean energy. And that's include both nuclears and also hydrogen, as well as the carbon capture technology. One of the things that I also learned is the Department of Energy also is in the process of investing about, I believe, if I have the number correctly, might be $8 billion to build out the regional hydrogen hub. So they are working with a lot of industries to actually figure out which region want to have this hydrogen infrastructure that is going on. This won't happen in the next 5 years, but it might start to see that coming in the next, 10 years, meaning 10 years afterward. So those are the things that I think we will actually need in order to making us achieved the net zero emission.
If I asked you what the odds are, what would you say?
Maybe I think if we put all, our willingness, our smartness of a lot of people together, I think we could do it.
Okay.
But if you ask the saying, is it going to be expensive? Yes, it is going to be expensive. But at the same time, I believe it will also help spur the economy that will be cleaner for, next generation to come.
Understood. Well, thank you very much for this crash course in both the change in the electricity industry and also looking ahead about what we might anticipate. I'm going to say goodbye and thank you very much, Romkaew, and I'm going to turn it back over to Abby, who I think has some questions from our listeners. So all the best from my side.
Thank you, Professor Hayward. Really enjoy talking with you.
Thank you, Professor Hayward. Yeah, just a couple questions. And for those of you tuning in on the live stream, we have a couple of minutes left. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the chat. So one question that I had was looking at something like electric vehicles, and maybe you touched on this and I missed it, but can you talk a little bit more about the economic benefit of electric cars, like specifically in California, for example? Are we going to be able to, have widespread charging stations and really move in that direction to get away from gasoline operated vehicles?
Let me get the charging station out of the way. I think it's definitely, because I think a lot of people view that as a new business, new opportunities, and therefore there's a lot of people who are willing to actually invest in those charging stations. Now, if you are asking whether would there be economics to actually buying EV, right? You probably want to think about, it may be expensive as a fixed cost investment for the initial time that you have to pay for the EV, because when you compare the EV cost with the regular gasoline, you will see the EV is much more expensive right now, right? We hope that as it's become widespread, the cost will actually come down much more. However, we probably also need to think about the operating costs as well. We can't just only think about the initial cost of the investment. If you're looking at whether the operating cost, meaning the gasoline cost versus the charging cost, I understand that the charging cost, if you charge during off-peak rate, it could save you a lot of money. It may get, I believe it might cost you only like $6, compared to the regular gasoline that costs you $30. So.
Got it. So we don't have any questions in the chat. So at this time, I'd just like to give you the last couple of minutes, Dr. Broehm, and any final thoughts or remarks that you'd like to share. And then I'll close us out.
Okay. Let me stop sharing for like I said, I think this is a very interesting time and challenging time. I think we are all want to see that we can move toward these net zero emissions very smoothly. It might be quite a pain to go from what we are right now toward that particular end goal. But eventually, I think with all the things that we're setting in terms of decarbonization, electrification, and trying to use more of a reliable and cleaner energy resources, we all actually could do it. And hopefully that our economy will actually spur more toward more cleaner and greener energy with that as well. And I really appreciate that you all listening in on this, and hopefully you all will continue to follow these issues and help contribute toward cleaner economy. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Broehm and Professor Hayward. Thank you all for joining us this morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Our next Master Chat will be on November 2nd, and we will be back to our hybrid structure for that. So we will be on campus in person, as well as live streaming on YouTube. So stay tuned for more details on that. Thank you so much.